Hello and welcome to another edition of True Audiophiles. Today we're going to talk about the mastering process and how important it is to the final sound of an album. So, there's some controversy around it because, there are obviously some different ways people master things, and I don't know if everybody completely understands what the process is of mastering an album. So, today we're going to talk about that. So basically how it boils down is this. So once an album has been recorded, with mics being placed in the right spots, having it be mixed and EQ'd appropriately, and get everything the way the musicians and the producers and the engineers want it to sound, they bring it to the mastering engineer for kind of the final polishing. And what the final polishing really does, for the most part, what they do is they'll maybe do a little bit of re-EQing a little bit. They'll add some compression for good or bad, depending on how you feel about the compression at the mastering stage. And, maybe a little bit of limiting here and there, but they do a lot of little things to the album to basically fine-tune the sound. Usually there's not a lot done in the mastering process in terms of different functions. It's mainly just EQing and using compression to kind of lower the dynamics and and believe it or not, that will actually, in some cases, give the album a little bit of punch. Over compression, which is done quite a bit nowadays, especially in the digital realm, is when they just crush it beyond where it really should be and adds a lot of distortion to the sound, takes away a lot of the dynamics, but it makes it sound louder, which a lot of people interpret as it sounding really good. So that is probably for something for a different day. But basically, getting back to what I was doing this video for to begin with, in terms of the mastering process itself, it can make a big difference in the sound of the album. Now, in my opinion, it is not anywhere near as important as what's done in the recording process, the mixing process either. So that's really where the heart of the sound is in those stages. If it's not recorded well, they don't have mics placed in the proper spots for the drums and the vocals and acoustic instruments, things on that nature, and it's not mixed properly, which mixing is a lot more complicated than it sounds because there's a lot of making sure the EQs for each instrument blend well together so you can hear everything really well, and a lot of factors going into that. So the mixing process and the recording process, by far, in my opinion, are the most important factor in how good an album is going to sound. That being said, the problem with the mastering process is you can make a good recording sound really bad, too. So there is some downside to that. So that's something that you have to take in consideration. A lot of the examples of that would be a lot of these new remasters of old recordings. Essentially, most of the time what they're doing is they're just taking the original mastering and they're adding a lot of compression to them. So they're squishing the dynamics so it'll sound as loud as all the newer recordings that are coming out. I would say this kind of phenomenon started probably right around the beginning of the 2000s. From recollections of people that I have spoken to in the industry, one of the big records or albums where this really started was Red Hot Chili Peppers' Californication, where that one was the first one where some people have recognized that there was really starting to be a little too much compression put to the mastering process and made everything just not sound as clean and as crisp and as dynamic. It just sounded squished. Probably some of the most notorious people for doing this in the mastering process has been Metallica. Death Magnetic was one album in particular that sounds just terrible. One of the things you can really notice on that album is there's one example, and I can't remember the track now, but it kind of starts off with the bass, and then all the other instruments come in, and then the bass guitar kind of just disappears in the mix because of the amount of compression that's being used, and it just doesn't sound right. It's really unbelievable how much of a big difference it'll make if something like that is mastered properly. One of the things that I've also noticed is on some Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs records. One album that comes to mind is Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction, for example, where you can really tell that the original mix, before it got mastered, they didn't do a whole lot of compression to the album. And when Mobile Fidelity got the mastering, or the two channel mix, if you will, of the album before it was mastered, they basically took that and essentially just transferred it right to record and to CD, and it sounds completely different than the regularly mastered version. Same thing with Faith No More, Angel Dust. There's also a Beck album. The name of the album, unfortunately, is escaping me right now, but there's a Beck album that Mobile Fidelity did that, I think it sounds good. It definitely is a different interpretation of the album, but it definitely is something that is really noticeable in terms of how big of a difference there is between the original mastering and the mastering that was done by Mobile Fidelity for audiophile reproduction. So that's kind of my take. So mastering can be important in the sense that it can really mess up a good recording, but my opinion stands where the recording itself and the mixing of the tracks is much more important than the mastering. But unfortunately, like I said, the mastering can make a big difference in a negative way in the sound quality of the recording. So that is this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know what you think in the comments section. I'd love to hear your take on it. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe. If you want to know when I release new videos, please hit that alert bell, and it'll let you know when my new videos come out. Thank you very much for listening and watching, too.